I've been saying for a long time that the way that we understand not just antidepressants, but all the drugs that we use in mental health problems is mistaken. That there is no evidence that they are targeting some underlying abnormality that produces the symptoms of depression or anxiety or psychosis or what we might call schizophrenia or anything else. The central idea that the book is concerned with is that there has been a substantial, to my mind, medical scandal going on over the last few decades, which concerns the mass prescribing of a certain class of drugs, namely antidepressants, which do little good and can cause substantial harm to some people on the spurious grounds that they work by correcting an underlying chemical imbalance. This idea that they correct a chemical imbalance was promoted initially by the pharmaceutical industry, but the medical profession have actively and passively supported this idea and helped to promote and maintain it as well. Nowadays, almost 20% of the population of England take an antidepressant, and almost 1 in 4 women are currently taking them. So that's a huge number of people. And many of those, it's 8.7 million people in England alone. And many millions of those people have taken them because they believed that a link between serotonin and depression had been established, and that antidepressants, and that the idea that antidepressants worked by correcting that had also been proven to be true. Now, most people in the psychiatric community and the research community have known for many years that the evidence that there is a link between serotonin and depression is actually very weak and not convincing and not consistent. But there was no paper that had got all that research together that could really sort of act as a definitive resource for people to make that claim. And so a few years ago, I got a team together to look at all the modern research on serotonin and depression. And in 2022, we published this paper, an umbrella review of all these different areas, including research on serotonin metabolites, serotonin receptors, serotonin levels, serotonin itself, levels in blood and urine and plasma, and some genetic evidence on some of the genes for the serotonin system. And basically we found that none of those areas provided convincing or consistent evidence of any sort of link between serotonin and depression, let alone a causal link, because of course, the system may simply be perturbed as a consequence of someone's emotional state, not just as a cause. Now, the serotonin theory of depression is one of the most thoroughly researched ideas about the biological origins of depression, but there are many other ideas or theories. The trouble is that none of them have been established either. There's no convincing or consistent evidence for the many other theories out there, such as depression is related to the inflammatory system or to processes around neurodegeneration or other brain chemical abnormalities, for example. There was a massive public reaction to this paper. People were really interested. The media were really interested in it. It was very widely reported at the time. And that was really nice to see. And it seemed like there was a discussion getting going among the general public. And of course, one of the things that people wanted to ask is, well, what does this mean for the fact that I'm taking antidepressants, or my friends taking antidepressants, or my relatives taking antidepressants? There was another reaction to the paper, though, and that came from elements of the medical profession, the medical establishment, who, it seemed to me, wanted to shut down that opening debate. So the Science Media Centre, which are an outfit that purportedly put information about science into the public, but happened to be funded partly by the pharmaceutical industry and by many other sectors of the commercial science sector, got together a group of experts after the publication of the paper to tell people that it really wasn't important. We knew that all along, they said. The findings are unsurprising. It's not news. The notion of depression being due to a chemical imbalance is outdated. It was largely met with yawns in the psychiatric community, said one of the less polite commentators. Then a couple of psychiatrists in London got together a big collection of psychiatrists to put together a letter that made criticisms of the paper, mostly inaccurate criticisms, mostly trivial criticisms, mostly actually just differences of opinion about how to go about doing a review. They didn't dispute the conclusion that there was no consistent or convincing evidence of a link between serotonin and depression, but wanted to maintain that there was some role for depression. There was enough evidence to suggest there was some role. The trouble is they couldn't specify what that role was. So they weren't putting forward any sort of testable hypothesis, merely a speculation. Elements of the media that also wanted to shut down the discussion weighed in and accused me of being in league with the American gun lobby, which was a surprise to me. This was because Tucker Carlson had done a program inspired by our paper, which I have to say was a very interesting program, which was very critical of the pharmaceutical industry, both in regard to antidepressants, but over a number of other issues that he'd looked into. But because Tucker Carlson is against gun controls, that must mean that I was supporting it, according to them. And they also threw in that, the Scientologists are also critical of psychiatric drugs, so therefore I must have some links with the Scientologists. There was a funny comment on Twitter at this time from someone called Bert, who I don't know, but he said it's very interesting that everyone is getting so agitated that an unproven theory remains unproven. The reason that people were getting agitated is this, though. One of the most common responses after the publication of our paper was that antidepressants work and it doesn't matter how they work. People were getting agitated because they didn't want the public to start questioning the use or rationale for using antidepressants. And I would say that this is false on two counts. Antidepressants don't work, or certainly don't work very well. I'll come on to that in a minute. But it seems to be more importantly that it is very important how they work. So if you are told that antidepressants are correcting some underlying abnormality in your brain, then of course it makes sense to take them, other things being equal. Doesn't necessarily mean you necessarily would take them, but you can see that there's some rationale for taking them. If you are told that these are drugs that change your brain chemistry, numb your emotions, and may help, and may therefore suppress what you're feeling, some people might decide to take them, but some people might not on that basis. It seems to me that's a very different prospect. And I think part of the reaction to the paper was that psychiatrists didn't want people to think that there might be an alternative way of understanding what antidepressants were doing. I've been saying for a long time that the way that we understand not just antidepressants, but all the drugs that we use in mental health problems is mistaken, that there is no evidence that they are targeting some underlying abnormality or some underlying mechanism that produces the symptoms of depression or anxiety or psychosis or what we might call schizophrenia or anything else. So I've been challenging this by formulating these two models. So that idea that these drugs are targeting an underlying abnormality is what I've called the disease-centered model of drug action. It's borrowed from general medicine, where it is generally the correct way of understanding what drugs do. But the other way of understanding what the drugs that are prescribed for mental health problems might be doing is what I've called the drug-centered model. And that's the idea that drugs change our brain chemistry, change the state of our brains, and thereby change our underlying mental activity, including our feelings, our thought processes, and sometimes our behavior. And this, of course, is familiar when we think of recreational drugs like alcohol and cannabis. Now, I'm not saying that antidepressants are exactly the same as alcohol and cannabis. Of course, drugs are different. They have different effects on the brain and different effects on our mental states. But they are, nevertheless, what they have in common with alcohol and cannabis is that they are drugs that cross the blood-brain barrier, change the brain, and thereby change our mental states in more or less subtle ways. So if you're taking this drug-centered view of antidepressants, you want to be asking then, well, how do antidepressants change our mental states and our physical states for that matter? How are they changing our biology and how does that manifest in us? And the first thing to say is that antidepressants come from many different chemical classes. So they have different sorts of effects. So I'm simplifying to just to describe them as if they were one class, which they're not. But many of them, particularly the SSRIs, probably the most cardinal and consistent feature of these drugs is that they cause sexual dysfunction. And associated with this, they seem to cause a blunting of emotional reactions. So they reduce the intensity of negative, but also of positive emotions. So people will often say when they're on these drugs that they can't cry, but also that they don't feel happiness or joy anymore. And this effect has also been shown in a volunteer study recently. So it's not just, it's not that it's down to the depression or anxiety or whatever else people are feeling, although of course that may contribute to it. Many antidepressants also cause lethargy, fatigue, some cause insomnia. Many of them cause physical dependence so that people have difficulty coming off them. And then an effect that some of them seem to have paradoxically in a small group of people, mostly younger people, is that they can induce agitation and tension. And this is sometimes, rarely I would say, but sometimes associated with increased suicidal thoughts. And as I say, this is mainly in younger people that they seem to have this effect. I don't know why. So the question then is, are these effects helpful? Of course, if you numb your emotions a bit, you might feel less intensely depressed or anxious, and that may be helpful, at least temporarily. The trouble is that randomized controlled trials comparing antidepressants to placebos really show that the difference is absolutely minuscule. It's 2 points difference on a 54-point scale. No proposed way of judging the clinical relevance of an effect has suggested that that is a clinically relevant or important size of effect. But moreover, it's probably a result of the fact that these trials are not completely blinded. They're meant to be double blind, but of course, antidepressants are active drugs. People know that people are therefore, many of them are going to guess whether they're on the active drug or the placebo, and therefore some people on the antidepressants will experience an enhanced placebo effect by virtue of guessing that they're taking the active substance. And it's been shown in several studies. Not many studies do actually ask people to guess or try and work out whether people know what they're on or not. Not surprisingly, as most of them are done by the pharmaceutical industry in order to get their drugs licensed. But there are 1 or 2 studies that have done that and show that in many, but not all, but many antidepressant studies, people can identify what they're taking. And there's quite a lot of research that shows that people who guess they're taking an active drug do better than people who guess they're taking a placebo. So it doesn't look from clinical trials as if those emotional numbing effects or any of the other effects are that beneficial. And we also have to weigh up whether any beneficial effects they might have will outweigh the adverse effects, the negative effects of taking antidepressants. Any drug that changes our brain chemistry and activity carries risks with it, particularly if you take it day in, day out for long periods of time. And there are lots of common adverse effects of antidepressants. There are some rarer and more serious effects. But the things that I'd like to draw your attention to, because they haven't received much publicity, is that the withdrawal that you get from antidepressants can, for some people, be really difficult. I've recently done a survey that showed that 40% of people who tried to get off their antidepressants couldn't actually do so. And that went up to 80% of people who'd been taking them for more than 2 years. And some people who stop their antidepressants seem to get into a protracted state of debility. It's almost like the withdrawal symptoms go on for long periods of time, sometimes for years. And another effect, lasting effect that has come out recently, which I think should really worry us, is persistent sexual dysfunction. So we've known for years, as I said, that one of the most common adverse effects of SSRIs is sexual dysfunction. But what's coming out now is that for a proportion of people, we don't know quite how many, but a recent survey suggested it might be even more than 10%, sexual dysfunction will persist after they have stopped taking the antidepressant. And some people, again, are reporting that this persistence is for years. Some people for lesser amounts of time, but some people for years. And it's often associated with persistence of emotional blunting as well. So the question is, how on earth did we get to this situation? So we're prescribing, widely prescribing these drugs that probably aren't very effective and can cause some really nasty complications for some people.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.